The snow fell quietly over Winterfell as Jon Snow stood at the highest tower, looking down at the icy land he once called home. So much had changed. Daenerys was gone. The war had taken its toll. But one thing still burned inside him. The North needed saving, and not from White Walkers or dragons, but from within. The new Warden of the North, a lord placed by the Southern Council, ruled with fear and greed. He wasn't a Stark. He didn't understand the North or its people. He raised taxes, punished loyalty, and ignored the cries of starving villagers. Jon, now living far from power, couldn't watch it happen any longer. He had left politics behind, but the North still lived in his blood. He wasn't alone in his thoughts. Far in the Iron Islands, Yara Greyjoy received word that her brother Theon had a secret plan. Theon had spent years trying to redeem himself. After helping Sansa escape Ramsay, he had changed. Guilt still haunted him, but he wanted to do something good for once, something brave. His plan: return to Winterfell in secret, find the weak spots in the new Lord's rule, and bring justice from the inside. Yara didn't trust the idea. "The North may forgive you, Theon," she said, "but don't expect them to forget." Still, she supported him. She knew her brother wasn't that broken boy anymore. So she sent a few trusted Ironborn with him, not as warriors, but shadows, spies who could move unseen and gather what they needed. Jon met Theon in the woods outside Winterfell, at a place only Starks would know, near the old Godswood. It had been years, but their greeting wasn't filled with anger or awkwardness, just a silent nod and a shared memory of everything they had lost. "I want to fix it," Theon said. "Not for me, but for them," Jon replied. "Then we do it smartly. No swords unless we need them. We win from the inside." Together, they reached out to old northern families, small houses who had once followed the Starks. Some were afraid to speak. Others were ready to rise. But all had one thing in common. They hated the new warden. He was cruel to the children, burnt farms for unpaid taxes, and had a southern army occupying the land like enemies instead of protectors. Yara, in her ship near White Harbor, began cutting off small trade routes, not enough to start war, but enough to starve the warden's army slowly. "Bleed them with silence," she told her men. Jon, now hiding in the crypts of Winterfell, remembered the words of his father. "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." He would swing it again, but only when the North stood behind him once more. Theon, meanwhile, walked through Winterfell as a forgotten ghost. The guards didn't notice him, just another servant boy in the shadows. He watched where they stored grain, how they guarded the Lord's chambers, who drank too much wine and talked too freely. He passed messages in secret to Jon, who sent them to Yara. One night, Theon found something worse than they imagined. Northern children taken as hostages, locked in the same kennels once used by Ramsay Bolton. The warden used them to control their families. If the North rose again, their children would die. That was the final straw. Jon knew this fight wasn't just about power anymore. It was about saving their people, especially the innocent. He and Theon stood in the dark of the crypts and made a pact, not with blood, but with the weight of duty. "We don't wait for a war," Jon said. "We start the fire from inside." The North had always known how to survive the cold. Now it would learn how to fight from within, quietly, smartly, like wolves in the snow. The moonlight over Winterfell seemed colder than usual. Everything looked peaceful on the outside, but inside, a storm was growing. Jon Snow moved through the hidden tunnels beneath the castle with the quietness of a ghost. These passages were old, built long before even the Starks ruled. Only a few knew of them, and Jon was one of them. Theon had passed him a new map. It showed when the guards changed shifts, which doors stayed unlocked at night, and most importantly, where the children were kept. Each detail came from days of quiet watching, careful listening, and earned trust from servants who still remembered House Stark's kindness. I saw Ned Umber's son. Theon had whispered to Jon, his voice shaking. 9 years old, locked in a cage with 2 others. He asked me if I was a ghost. That image haunted Jon. The North had suffered before, but never like this. Not by outsiders, not by their own. Meanwhile, Yara's Ironborn quietly set fire to a supply ship bound for Winterfell. It sank just before reaching White Harbor, and no one claimed responsibility. But it sent a message. The North was bleeding, and someone had a knife to its throat. Back inside Winterfell, Jon wore the clothes of a stable hand, blending in with the background. His eyes missed nothing. He saw how the new warden, Lord Cregan Royce, enjoyed parading his power. Once a proud man from the Vale, he had turned sour, drunk on control. He called the Northerners savages and forced them to kneel in the Great Hall once a week, just to remind them who ruled now. Jon watched him laugh as a man's hand was chopped off for stealing a loaf of bread to feed his starving daughter. And none could speak. The guards were too many, the fear too strong, but cracks had started to form. Lady Mormont's cousin, a sharp-eyed girl named Gianna, had slipped Jon a note during one of the forced gatherings. It simply read, "House Mormont remembers," and they weren't the only ones. Across the North, loyal blood began to boil. Small bannermen, even broken families, started whispering again, about wolves, about rebellion, about justice. They spoke Jon Snow's name in secret, though many believed him dead or banished. Then came the first strike. Late one night, Jon and Theon sneaked into the guardhouse near the kennels. 2 guards stood lazily at the door, drunk on sweet wine. Theon distracted them with a small fire in the stables, while Jon slid inside, quiet as falling snow. He found the children, weak, frightened, but alive. He didn't say a word. He just unlocked the cages, handed them cloaks, and led them into the dark. They escaped through the hidden tunnels, reaching the safety of the woods where Yara's men waited. It wasn't a full victory, but it was something. The next morning, chaos erupted in Winterfell. The warden was furious. "Who dares touch my prisoners?" He roared in the hall, his voice echoing off cold stone. He ordered a full search of the castle, punished 10 innocent servants, and began hanging those he suspected, including a young cook who once served Arya Stark. Jon watched from the shadows, his rage growing colder, sharper. "We hit him where it hurts next," he told Theon. "His supply line, his gold. So they did. Yara's spies poisoned a treasury wagon. The gold meant for southern bribes vanished into smoke and ruin. Letters were intercepted. Deals were broken. The warden's allies in the Vale began to doubt him. No man supports a drowning wolf. And through it all, the people began to hope again. They saw hooded figures leave bread at doors. They heard whispers of, "The wolf returned." Children spoke of a tall man with black curls who helped them escape. And though Jon never claimed the Stark name, the North began to call him one again. But hope was dangerous. The warden wasn't a fool. He tightened his grip. He brought in more southern troops, lined the walls with archers, and declared that any traitor, man, woman, or child, would be hanged. Jon knew the time for whispers was ending. "We've lit the fire," Theon said quietly beside him one evening. "Now we burn the house down," Jon nodded. His eyes were full of snow, steel, and something colder than winter. "Then we finish what we started." Winterfell had become a cage wrapped in stone and fear. Lord Cregan Royce knew someone was working against him, someone clever, someone local. The children's escape had shaken him. The missing gold, the poisoned wagons, the broken silence in the halls, it all pointed to one thing: rebellion. He didn't know Jon Snow was behind it, not yet, but he could feel the ghost of House Stark moving through the castle like a cold wind. To crush it, he did what southern lords always did when they feared the North. He tried to break its spirit. He ordered the public execution of Lady Mormont's cousin, Jonna, accusing her of feeding lies to the people. She stood tall, even as they dragged her to the great hall's center. Her last words before the sword fell were simple. "The North remembers." Jon Snow stood in the shadows that day. He saw it all. His fists were clenched, his jaw locked. He had tried to fight from within, quietly. But now, blood had been spilled, not in war, but in front of children, elders, servants, in front of Winterfell's soul. It was time to change the game. He met Theon in the crypts that night, where the statues of old Starks watched in silence. "No more shadows," Jon said. "We make them see the North's true face." The plan was bold, almost mad. They would send a message the Warden couldn't ignore or hide. Jon and Theon chose the night of the Southern Feast. Lord Royce planned a celebration to welcome more Vale soldiers. Nobles, merchants, and soldiers gathered in the Great Hall, drinking, laughing, pretending Winterfell wasn't built on bones and fire. That's when it happened. The doors slammed shut. Torches along the walls flared with oil, igniting a pattern carved by Theon and Jon over the past few nights. On the hall's stone floor, flames revealed a burning sigil, the direwolf of House Stark, glowing in gold and red, howling with fury. And on the high table, where the Warden's plate once sat, was placed Jonna Mormont's pendant, the bear's tooth, stained with blood. Gasps filled the room. Panic followed. And before the guards could react, arrows rained down from above. Not to kill, but to warn. Yara had arrived. From the towers, her ironborn marksmen had climbed unseen, aided by villagers and ex-soldiers who still held loyalty in their hearts. They didn't storm the castle, not yet. But they made one thing clear. Winterfell was no longer under Royce's control. In the confusion, Jon appeared before the crowd, hooded, calm, and unmistakable. His voice echoed through the flames and fear. "I am no lord," he said, "but I was born here. I bled for this land, and I will not watch it die in silence." The southern nobles stared in disbelief. Some recognized him. Others whispered, "The bastard of Winterfell. He lives." But it wasn't enough to win. Not yet. Jon and Theon vanished back into the dark before soldiers could trap them. But the spark had become fire now, not just in the castle, but across the north. House Glover raised its banner the next day, then House Trewin, then the Flint clans. They had waited years for a sign. Jon Snow had given it. Meanwhile, Yara's ships blocked all trade routes to Winterfell. No food, no gold, no messages in or out. The castle was turning into a tomb. The Warden, red-faced and furious, ordered mass arrests. Anyone even whispering Jon Snow's name was beaten or thrown into the dungeons. He doubled the guard. He tried to scare the North into silence once more. But fear had changed sides now. In the taverns, people sang again, soft songs of wolves and ghosts, of a snow who would bring the cold justice of the North back to Winterfell. Even in the villages far away, people lit small fires shaped like direwolves. Some carved them into trees. Others painted them on doors. It was a movement now, one that no army could stop. Theon stood beside Jon one evening at the edge of the woods, watching the fires glow in the distance. "You think we're ready?" Theon asked. Jon didn't answer at first. His eyes were on Winterfell, where the storm was waiting. "No," he finally said. "But the North is." The snow was falling harder now, like the North itself was preparing for war. Jon stood on a hilltop, overlooking Winterfell, cloaked in furs, sword on his back, a wolf's fury burning behind his eyes. He had tried patience. He had tried silence. But the Warden had answered with blood. There was no going back. Below, Yara's small army moved quietly through the woods, blending with the night. Ironborn warriors, northern rebels, and even a few wildlings Jon had once called enemies, all united by one cause, to take back Winterfell. Not just from Lord Royce, but from every hand that had gripped the north like a leash. Inside the castle, the warden's mind was unraveling. Reports flooded in, villages refusing orders, messengers gone missing, food wagons burned. His own soldiers were growing restless. The gold was gone, the wine was low, and the people, the same northerners he had called barbarians, now walked the streets with their heads held high, whispering a name that haunted him. Snow. He tried to hang more rebels. He even sent a message to King's Landing, begging for support, but no raven ever arrived. Yara had seen to that. The sky belonged to the north now. One of his closest guards, a young man named Harlan, had once served under House Stark. That night, Harlan left the gate unlocked. It was a quiet sound, the slow creak of iron, but it opened the path to vengeance. Jon, Theon, and a small band of fighters slipped inside, dressed as prisoners from the last raid. They moved through the tunnels like shadows, each step bringing them closer to the heart of Winterfell. The plan was simple. Create chaos. Divide the southern troops. And when the time came, strike from within. Theon peeled off first, heading toward the armory. His job was to set the fire, a signal. He passed the same hallway where he once stood beside Ramsay, watching people suffer. Now, he would burn the memory of that man away. He poured oil across the floor, whispered a prayer to the old gods, and lit the match. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was loud enough. Flames rose. Panic followed. And the gate guards, thinking it was a siege, ran to their posts. That's when the second part began. Yara's army charged through the fog, not like invaders, but like wolves coming home. With northern banners held high, and the Ironborn attacking the side walls, the warden's soldiers split. Some dropped their weapons. Others turned against their own, tired of fighting a land they didn't belong to. Jon led the strike into the great hall. His sword, Longclaw, shimmered with frost and firelight. With him came Jonna's brother, a silent, stone-faced boy who had trained with the wildlings. He didn't speak, but his axe did. Inside, the warden sat on a high seat he hadn't earned. His guards moved forward, but Jon didn't hesitate. He fought like a man possessed, not for power, not for glory, but for every name Royce had cursed, every northern child he had locked in chains. When it was over, the hall was quiet. The warden, bloodied and gasping, fell to his knees before Jon. "You don't have the right," Royce spat. "You're a bastard. You're nothing." Jon didn't raise his sword yet. He looked at the burning torches, at the people watching, men and women of the north, once broken, now rising. "I never needed a title," Jon said coldly. "I had their trust." Then he turned his back to the man who had ruled Winterfell like a tyrant. "Take him to the dungeons," he ordered. Let the north decide his fate. It was over. The castle was free. The people gathered in the yard, staring up at Jon on the battlements. Some cheered, others cried. But all understood one thing. Winterfell was home again. Jon didn't smile. He didn't raise his sword. He just stood there, staring out at the snowy land, knowing the battle was won, but peace was still far away. Beside him, Theon dropped to one knee. "You brought it back," he said. "You brought us back." Jon placed a hand on his shoulder, quiet as ever. "No," he whispered. "We all did. The battle was over, but Winterfell didn't feel like victory yet. The halls still smelled of ash and blood. The stone walls held the screams of those who'd suffered in silence for too long. Snow blew in through the shattered gates, covering the bloodstains like a shroud. Jon Snow walked those halls quietly, not as a hero, not as a lord, but as a man carrying the weight of everything it had taken to win. The dungeons beneath the castle were colder than the wind outside. Lord Cregan Royce sat chained, his once golden cloak now just a rag clinging to his back. His eyes had lost their shine, not from fear, but from disbelief. He couldn't understand how a bastard and a broken Greyjoy had undone everything. King's Landing. You've started something you can't finish. Jon stood silently, staring at him through the iron bars. No one's coming, he finally said. They've already forgotten you. Royce laughed bitterly. You think this land will stay loyal? You think you've won anything but a few songs? Give it time. They'll hate you too. Jon turned away without another word. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to listen. To the whispers in the walls, to the people in the courtyard, to the voices of the North that had been quiet for too long. Outside, Yara Greyjoy stood over the fallen banners of the southern houses. She had fought hard, lost men, but she hadn't lost her fire. You should claim the seat, she told Jon. Winterfell needs a Stark. I'm not a Stark, he replied flatly. You bled like one, fought like one. And the North already believes you are. The people did believe it, and that was the problem. Crowds had begun to gather each morning in the yard, staring up at the castle like they were waiting for something. They called Jon King in the North again, just like they had years ago. But he didn't want a crown. He didn't want power. He just wanted peace. But peace is a fragile thing, especially in the North. Word spread fast. Other houses began sending ravens, some in support, some in warning. The Vale had gone quiet, too quiet. The South might see this as rebellion. And with no queen or king strong enough in King's Landing, any spark could start another war. Theon sat beside Jon in the Godswood that night, the same place where Bran used to sit under the weirwood tree. We did what we had to do, Theon said. But I still feel like we're waiting for something worse. Jon looked up at the bloody red leaves swaying in the cold wind. We are. And he was right. The next day, a raven arrived from the wall, from Castle Black. The message was short, written in a shaking hand. Strange riders spotted beyond Eastwatch. Not wildlings, something else. Something worse. Jon's stomach dropped. He had hoped the true war was over. He had hoped the dead were finally gone. But the North had its own way of reminding him. Winter never ends easily. He met with Yara, Theon, and the lords of the northern houses. He read the raven aloud, watched their faces pale. Could be nothing, someone said. It's never nothing, Theon muttered. Jon stood, his voice steady. Winterfell is free, but the North isn't safe yet. We must prepare, not just for men, but for what lies beyond the wall. Another war? Yara raised an eyebrow. You've barely survived this one. Jon nodded. Then we fight again. The room was silent. But outside, in the cold wind, a wolf howled. Not for victory, not for glory, but for what was coming next. The cold wasn't just biting anymore. It was crawling, creeping into bones. The kind of cold that made animals restless, that made old men stare at the sky like it owed them answers. The kind of cold Jon Snow knew too well. He stood on the battlements of Winterfell, watching as new fires were lit in the courtyards below, not for warmth, but for fear. The raven from Castle Black had changed everything. What they had thought was victory had only been a pause between storms. Strange riders beyond Eastwatch. No flags, no sigils, moving in silence. The wall was still standing, but something was stirring beyond it. Something no one understood. I thought they were all gone, Theon said, joining Jon as his breath misted in the frozen air. They were, Jon replied. But dead things have a way of coming back. Word spread quickly. Northern houses that had just begun to rebuild now faced another terror. The old stories came back. White walkers, shadows in the snow, blue eyes in the night. Most dismissed it. Some prepared. A few ran. Yara wasn't scared. She was angry. I didn't bleed for Winterfell just to lose it to ghosts, she barked. If something's out there, we crush it. But Jon knew better. You didn't crush the dead. You survived them. He called a council with every northern house that had bent the knee. The great hall, still blackened from Royce's fires, echoed with tension. "I need fighters," Jon said, standing where Ned Stark once passed judgment. "Not to invade, not to rule. To defend. If Eastwatch falls, the North falls next." Many agreed. Others hesitated. After all, hadn't Jon already defeated the dead once? Hadn't the Night King burned under dragonfire? But something about this felt different, and deeper. As the meeting ended, a rider from Castle Black arrived, frostbitten, shaking, near death. "They're not whites," he gasped. "Not walkers, not human. We don't know what they are." Then he died right there on the floor, before anyone could ask more. Jon stared at the body, jaw tight. He'd seen too many people die without answers. He wasn't going to let it happen again. That night, he stood in the crypts once more. He lit a torch and walked past the statues of Lyanna, Ned, Robb, even Rickon. He spoke to them, though he knew they couldn't hear him. "I don't know what's coming," he whispered, "but I'll protect them. I'll protect the North, like you all did." He stayed there until dawn. The next day, he chose his fighters, a mix of wildlings, northern loyalists, and Ironborn who refused to return to sea. Theon surprised him by joining the group. "You've done enough," Jon said, but Theon shook his head. "Not yet. Not until I die doing something that matters." Jon didn't argue. He understood that kind of guilt. Before leaving, he made a decision that shocked many. He named Lady Lyra Manderly as Winterfell's steward. A young woman, barely 20, but smart, fair, and loyal. "Keep the people safe," he told her. "Winterfell doesn't need a king. It needs a shield." He left at dawn. Eastwatch was a 6-day ride through snow, woods, and ruins. As they traveled, the land changed. Animals had gone quiet. No birds, no tracks, just silence. On the 5th day, they found it. An empty village, no blood, no fire, just gone. Plates still on tables, doors wide open, horses untouched. Jon felt it then, deep in his bones. They weren't killed, he said. They were taken. The group camped with weapons drawn, sleep lost to fear. That night, Jon dreamed of the wall, not falling, but whispering, like it was speaking in voices he couldn't understand. And when he woke, he wasn't cold anymore. He was sweating. The snow had stopped. But something darker was in the air. A presence, watching, waiting. And in the distance, far beyond the trees, a strange sound echoed across the night. Not human, not animal. Something ancient. Jon stood slowly, sword in hand, heart pounding. The war for Winterfell was over. The war for the North was just beginning. The dawn never came. It was morning, yet the sky above Eastwatch was stuck in an eerie gray, like the sun had forgotten how to rise. Snowflakes fell slower now, as if time itself was holding its breath. Jon Snow stood at the edge of a ridge, staring down at what remained of the wall's last defense, Eastwatch by the sea. Or what used to be. No, it was quiet. Too quiet. The great wooden gate had been splintered, not broken by force, but melted like wax. The ice bricks near the base of the wall were blackened, almost scorched, but there was no fire. No heat, just the absence of life. The group behind Jon was silent. Wildlings, Northerners, Ironborn, all hardened fighters. Yet not one of them moved forward. "It's like the place died," one of them whispered. Jon took a breath and stepped ahead. His boots crunched on frozen gravel as he approached the open gate. The air was colder now, not just in temperature, but in feeling. It felt wrong, thick, heavy, like the world was holding something back. Inside the ruins of Eastwatch, no bodies were found, no bones, no blood, just empty clothes, scattered weapons, and a strange black dust that clung to every surface. Theon bent down and touched it. It stuck to his glove, almost alive. "What is this?" he asked, rubbing his fingers together. Jon shook his head. "Not ash. Not snow." He didn't say what he was really thinking. "Not natural." They found the old master's chamber half buried in snow. The books were untouched, pages frozen mid-turn. But one parchment had been pinned to the wall with a dagger. No name, no signature, just a message in a shaky hand. "They don't burn. They don't bleed. They whisper. And we listen." A chill ran down Jon's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. This wasn't the Night King's army. This was something else. Something older, darker, quieter. And then they heard it. Not footsteps. Not screams. Whispers. Thousands of them. Too many to understand. Not loud. Not far. Just there. Every man turned at once, drawing blades without knowing why. The forest beyond Eastwatch, thick with dead trees and frostbitten fog, seemed to breathe as if it was watching them. "They're here," Theon whispered. Then something moved. A flicker. A blur. At first they thought it was a shadow. Then two. Then dozens. Moving through the trees. Not walking. Not running. Gliding. No faces. No armor. Just shapes wrapped in mist and something darker than night. One of the younger men, a wildling named Orric, fired an arrow. It passed through the figure. It didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. Then the thing stopped moving and turned. No face, just a mouth. It opened, and the whisper came out like wind through bones. The world shook. Orric screamed, clutching his ears. Blood ran from his nose and eyes. And then he was gone. Vanished. His clothes fell where he stood, just like the ones in the village. Jon didn't waste time. "Run!" he shouted. They scattered. No plan, no formation. Just survival. Jon grabbed Theon by the arm and dragged him toward the broken stairs leading back to the higher ridge. Behind them, the forest erupted, not with noise, but absence of it. A silence so deep it roared. More figures appeared, hundreds now. They didn't chase. They just followed, slowly, unhurried, patient, because they weren't hunters. They were collectors. They didn't need to kill. They just took. Jon and what remained of his group reached a high cliff where their horses were tied. 3 men were missing. 2 more refused to speak, eyes wide, minds broken. And still, no sound from the things below. Jon turned to face the fog, gripping Langala. "What are they?" Theon, pale as ice, muttered, "This isn't death. This is something worse." Jon knew what had to be done. Ride, back to Winterfell. Warn them. Light every fire. Call every banner. Whatever this is, it's coming. "But what about you?" one of the Ironborn asked. Jon stared down at the forest below. The shapes had stopped at the edge of the trees, just watching, waiting. "I need answers. I'll stay. Just long enough to learn what they are. Then I'll come back. You might not. I know." Theon placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "If you don't, we'll fight." "Like you would." Jon gave a weak smile. "Don't fight like me. Fight smarter." The group rode off into the fog, back toward Winterfell, now the last hope of the North. And Jon Snow turned to face the silence again, sword in hand, alone, as the whispering drew closer.